Welcome to StartCon 2019. Today it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you the 29th Prime Minister of Australia, the Honourable Malcolm Turnbull. As Prime Minister, Malcolm's first policy initiative was to launch the $1 billion National Innovation and Science Agenda, which is designed to drive innovative Australian companies, private sector investment into research commercialisation, venture capital into high-potency Australian startups, drive digital literacy skills and STEM skills, and also help incubators and accelerators. Before he was in politics, Malcolm was a successful journalist, lawyer, merchant banker, and venture capitalist. As an investor, he always said he did best in startups, and his track record in venture capital would make most of the VCs in the room quite envious. As an investor, early-stage investor in AussieMail, which is one of Australia's pioneering internet service providers, he turned a $500,000 investment into a $57 million exit. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Malcolm Turnbull.
Thank you very much, Matt. It's great to be here. Innovation is the key to productivity. It is the key to success in the modern world. The times we are living in are unprecedented in terms of the change that we face. The pace of change is unprecedented in both its scale and its pace. And what that means is that if you want to succeed as a nation or as a company, as an individual, you have to be prepared to embrace those times, and you have to be prepared to make volatility your friend. You can fight against it if you wish, but you'll lose. You have to recognise the times we live in and seize the opportunities they deliver. So that's what the National Innovation and Science Agenda was about. That was my first major economic policy announcement in 2015. And you know, when I announced it with Christopher Pyne and Wyatt Roy, the minister and the assistant minister, I said that I could not guarantee that everything would work. Because, you know, journalists always say, will you guarantee this will work? Well, I said, no, I can't. I can't. I said, some of these measures will not work, and we'll dump them. Some of them will be reasonably effective, and we'll seek to improve them. And if we see anybody doing something that achieves the same goals better than us, we will shamelessly plagiarise them. You can do that in government. I wouldn't encourage you to do that in software. So the bottom line was, it was innovation, it was agile, and it recognised the nature of the times. Now, the Innovation and Science Agenda had many elements, literally 24 elements, ranging from new funds, the Biomedical Translation Fund, the CSIRO Innovation Fund, which Main Sequence Ventures manages, tax concessions for early stage investment, changes to our corporate insolvency rules so that we had greater emphasis on business continuity. It's always been an agenda item of mine because I admired the way Chapter 11 in the United States encouraged businesses to keep going rather than allowing secured lenders to pull the shutters down and wipe everybody else out just so they could get their money back. But it had a whole range of initiatives. And, you know, some have had greater impact than others. There's no doubt about that. But what we do know is that we have today a much stronger innovation ecosystem, a much stronger venture capital ecosystem than we had 5 or 6 years ago. In fact, 5 years ago, there was about $155 million raised for venture capital in Australia. In the last 2 years, it's over 10 times that amount. And you all know that Australia is now seen as a centre for innovation. We are seeing so many unicorns developing, many of them represented here today, and many centurions that will go on to become unicorns and startups that will become centurions. We are seeing that ecosystem develop, and it is in large part due to the encouragement that the National Innovation and Science Agenda gave. But I think, you know, in a way even more important than the particular measures was the fact that we started talking at a government level about the importance of innovation. Now, there are plenty of people that encouraged me not to do that, I might say. There are plenty of people in the political environment who believe that the way to win is to trade off, prey on people's fear of change. And they said, if you talk about innovation, people will think that means there's going to be a change and someone with a computer is going to take their job. Well, that is a political reality. And there are people that exploit fear of change in every environment. And this rise of populism, rise of protectionism around the world is a feature of that. But believe me, denying change, in denying the importance of innovation, is like denying climate change. It's denying reality. You know, the world is changing. So if you want to live in the past as a country or as a company, in other words, if you want to deny the changes that are around you, then you will get taken over. And you've only got to look at so many examples of businesses, great businesses, that denied the changes around them and then got wiped out by newcomers. So if you are not prepared to disrupt your own business, to be prepared to, in effect, disrupt the way you're conducting your business, your system, your government, the way you govern, the way you administer the government, if you're not prepared to do that, somebody else will do it for you. Now, one of the most important things about innovation is providing the ecosystem, the environment that supports it. And I've talked a little bit about the NISA, and I know Matt and I will talk about it later. And these, by the way, these measures, whether it's legislation or schemes or funds, they've got to be renewed all the time. You know, you can't just set and forget in an area like this. You've got to be constantly examining, as you do in your businesses, constantly examining the changing environment and saying, well, is this still working? Okay, it's not still working. We'll do something else. You've got to treat everything as something from which you learn. You know, this is one of the biggest problems, the fundamental biggest problems in government. And I sought to change that culture, is that you get this blame-based culture, this culture where people are afraid to, quote, make a mistake, afraid to undertake something new for fear that it may not be as successful or perform in accordance with expectations. So what? Not everything does, not everything will. That's why I set the expectations very clearly. You have to be able to say, politicians have to have the courage to say this, these measures are the best ideas I have to solve the problem at the moment. We've done a lot of work, this is the best idea we've got. We believe it'll work, but if it doesn't, we'll do something else and we'll certainly learn a lot from the process. You've got to set those expectations right. This is second nature to people in business, particularly in startups and in technology and innovation-based businesses, but it is still a huge change that we have to confront in politics. Can I say, talk about ecosystems in another way? One of the biggest undertakings during my time in government was the well over $200 billion investment in the Australian Defence Force's capabilities. You know, new submarines, new frigates, offshore patrol vessels, whole range of capabilities across the three armed forces. And those capabilities are overwhelmingly being built in Australia. Now, that was not because I wanted to sort of pork barrel jobs, you know, in one part of Australia or another. It was because I recognised, and my ministers recognised, and I give a lot of credit to Christopher Pyne in this regard, because he really understood innovation. It's a pity he wasn't the innovation minister for longer, but he had other jobs to do. But the reality is, we recognise that if you have a continuous defence industry in Australia, which is right at the cutting point of technology, obviously, that creates an ecosystem from which will spin off so many other businesses, opportunities, whether it is in advanced manufacturing per se, or whether, for example, it is in cybersecurity. I mean, look at the way the cybersecurity sector has boomed in Australia in recent years. That is a direct consequence of our cybersecurity strategy we published in 2016, supported by funding, supported by AustCyber and other institutions, all of which were designed to create that ecosystem. Another big part of our ecosystem is livable cities. Again, the reality is capital is mobile and fairly objective about where it goes. Humans are less so. If you have livable cities, that is a real economic benefit. When we talk about the environment, when we talk about mass transit, when we talk about the amenity of the cities in which we live, and we have great cities in Australia, all of that is a massive economic asset as well. But you know what? The biggest asset, the most important asset, is all of you. Government policies are critically important, but ultimately our best assets are not under the ground, they're walking around on top of it. Your courage, your commitment, your preparedness to have a go, and if it doesn't work out, have another go, that commitment is what is driving our innovation economy and what is driving our economic future, what is ensuring it. Because productivity is the key, and innovation is what enables productivity. So without you, Australia will not have the bright future that it does. I want to thank you for your efforts, thank you for your innovation, and wish you all the best for the StartCon conference. Thank you. There he is.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Now, in a 2012 interview with the Herald, you said that figuring out why Australia earns so little of its GDP from its own ideas is the issue that keeps you up most at night. Is this still what keeps you up most at night?
Well, you know, nothing keeps me up at night, really. I'm actually a very good sleeper. Yeah, that was a very big issue back in 2012, and I did a lot of thinking and reading and, you know, just talking to people about it, and that's really what the NISA came out of. And my conclusion was that the key has got to be doing everything you can to encourage an innovative, culture, an innovative ecosystem, which is not just about startups, by the way, Matt. I mean, it is, fundamentally, it's a cultural thing. Julie Bishop, our great friend, used to say the reason I was so keen on innovation was because I got bored quickly. That may well be an element in it, but the bottom line is, if you're in an environment that is changing all the time, you have got to be prepared to review what you're doing. You've got to have that culture of innovation, and it has to pervade every part of our society, and not just, and obviously startups, I guess, is at the pointy end of it. But I think we're doing a lot better. There's no room for complacency, and I think some of the NISA measures, for example, have been well, obviously all the financial ones have done very well, the funds have done well. I was in San Francisco at the landing pad, actually, just a week or so ago. Very impressed with what I saw there. I'm glad they're working.
If we talk about these for a little bit, so, I mean, arguably you were Australia's most technology-focused Prime Minister.
That means I knew how to turn on a smartphone.
You committed over $1 billion to...
My reputation for technological knowledge is so exaggerated. But everything's relative. Everything is relative,
Well, you committed over $1 billion to 24 policy initiatives over 11 portfolios, and maybe I can go through a few of them, right? There's over $100 million in tax incentives for angel investors, $75 million to the CSIRO's research arm, Data61, $30 million for Cybersecurity Growth Centre, $15 million to set up the CSIRO Innovation Fund, which is a $200 million fund, $10 million for a $250 million biomedical translation fund, $48 million for STEM literacy, $14 million to encourage women and girls into the sector, $50 million for digital literacy, and $10 million to the Australian Computing Academy. I don't think you really had enough of a run to do what you really wanted to do, however. You're kind of hamstrung by conservative members of your party and the Nationals. I mean, if you had your time again and free reign, what would you be done further past NISA?
Well, on innovation, you just got to keep on reviewing what you're doing, staying very close to the sector, and if it's, as I said earlier, I mean, it's pretty basic. If something's working, if it's really adding value, then do more of it. If you feel it's not working or it's not having an impact, then dump it and do something else. I mean, it's just the one thing is there's no place for set and forget in any area of government policy, but particularly in this area, because everything else is moving. See, governments have a tendency to think they're the centre of the universe, right? And they think that they make changes and then everybody else adjusts. Well, the reality is the world is changing. I mean, particularly in the digital area, there are players virtually every digital company has got a global reach. But some are gigantic. I mean, Facebook, 2.8 billion accounts, right? What is that, a third of the world? I mean, it's massive. So governments have got to recognise that they're operating in a dynamic environment as well as everybody else, and be prepared to adjust their policies accordingly.
In the lead up to the election, you said in a speech, all Australians, not just economists, know that we need to innovate and build new industries and strengthen existing ones because the mining construction boom has ended and the economy must transition to create new sources of growth and jobs. What do you think the key industries are that we should be building in Australia that we're not? Well,
I think what we've got to recognise that labour-intensive industries are ones that we do not have a comparative advantage in because we're a high-wage economy. But really knowledge-based industries right across the board are ones that we should be leading in, whether it is in bioscience, whether it is in software, whether it's in artificial intelligence. I mean, there is no limit. We're limited only by our imagination, and we have our biggest comparative advantage. We'll tell you what our comparative advantages are, in my view. One, our people. Well-educated, innovative, and becoming more so. Two, we have the most successful multicultural society in the world. I mean, don't forget this. Think about it. We're in a world where tensions between people of different religions and races and backgrounds and cultures appears to be getting worse. In Australia, we have around just under 30% of people in Australia who call Australia home were born outside of Australia. Over half have one parent born overseas. And we have the highest rate of immigration of any comparable developed country, and yet we get on very harmoniously and well. That is a huge asset. We're also in the same time zone as the fastest growing part of the world, East Asia, and particularly Southeast Asia. And I'd say also, Matt, we've got a huge opportunity, I believe, in energy. We have reached an inflection point in energy where we can become a very, very cheap, clean energy economy. We're going to move away from coal. I know there are some people who've got sentimental attachment to that, but basically we are now in a position. I mean, I look back to when I was Environment Minister, in Howard's government, and the cost of renewables was huge, vastly higher than conventional sources of power. We're now in a position where the cost of variable renewables, particularly solar, keeps on coming down, and there's a lot further to go, as the folks over at UNSW will tell you. They're leading the world in some of the best research in that area. And we've got, huge land mass, great solar resource. That is going to become a big opportunity. We will switch from being a high-cost energy country to being a low-cost energy country and a low emission energy country. And you know, this happens. I mean, technology does that to you. Look at the United States. You know, it was a oil importer and a gas importer, and then technology discovered fracking. Now, people may have horizontal drilling and fracking. People may have, you know, have different views about whether it was a good idea from an environmental point of view, but that was literally America's energy profile was changed, turned on a dime because of a technological breakthrough in innovation.
So you then proceed to win the election, but by the smallest majority since 1961. And almost overnight, innovation was blamed.
I'm sure that's true, by the way, but anyway, but it doesn't matter. Yeah, it was a narrow majority. Yeah.
But almost overnight, innovation.
Julia Gillard didn't even have a majority.
Okay, well, technically.
But still, a win is a win.
And almost overnight, innovation was blamed for not resonating with the voters. I mean, Industry, Innovation and Science Minister Sinodis said that the government took an election shellacking because its objective to drive a more entrepreneurial society did not resonate with everyday Australians.
Well, you know, Arthur said that. I really wish he hadn't said that, and he was completely, I love him dearly, right? He's one of my best friends, but I winced when he said that. It was not, honestly, that wasn't a correct analysis. But anyway, but you know, but here's the problem, Matt. This is the difficulty. You can go along, and maybe you can win elections by telling people what they want to hear. Mm-hmm. Maybe you can win elections by actually lying to people. It's not unknown. Truly, it isn't. But maybe people do. I remember, you know, Bill Shorten nearly won. Well, he didn't nearly. He did well in 2016 by telling people I was going to sell Medicare. You know, ludicrous, right? But the bottom line is, if you want to maintain Australia as a high-wage country with a generous social welfare safety net, you have to embrace innovation. If you don't, you'll fall behind. I mean, like it isn't rocket science. It's screamingly obvious. And so, you know, as I said, denialism might be of a short-term political advantage, but if you deny reality long enough, it mugs you.
Do you think all Australians know that? Do you think all Australians know that we need to innovate as a country?
Well, I think the answer, well, not, you know, all Australians is a big term. There's a lot of people, but I think it's really important to explain that innovation is not just about some smart people, you know, like folks in this room, you know, coming up with great ideas and making billions. It's a question of staying ahead. It's a bit now. You know, I think we've done a better job, frankly, with trade than with innovation in terms of people understanding the importance of trade. You know, there is a global wave of protectionism, and it's, you know, fueled by xenophobia, in some places racism. It's, you know, complex phenomenon. It's fueling sort of right-wing authoritarian populist movements in a number of countries. We've managed to avoid that in Australia, and, you know, we managed to do things like keep the Trans-Pacific Partnership alive after Trump pulled out, and with general support. So I think people understand, particularly in regional Australia, how important trade is. But you know, you just need. You know what? That's the vomit principle. You know what I'm talking about? It's
I don't.
Okay. Well, it's an old political principle. It says, at the point where you have said something so often, you feel that if you say it again, you will vomit. At that point, maybe you're getting through. So you have to be persistent, and you can't sort of drop the ball. You've got to be prepared to keep on making the case for whatever it is: innovation, trade, you know, open society, whatever.
So, I mean, while we're talking about trade, I mean, one of your predecessors, Paul Keating, said that famously, if Australia continued to muddle along and sell a bit of wool or a bit of wheat or a bit of iron ore and let the sophisticated industrial side of the country fall away, Australia could become a banana republic. Australia now ranks 93rd in the Harvard Economic Complexity Index, which is a measure of economic sophistication of how easily your products can be produced by another country overseas. And we now rank behind Mauritius, Oman, Moldova, Botswana, Saudi Arabia, El Salvador, and the Dominican Republic. Manufacturing as a share of GDP is down from about 15% in the 1990s to about 5.8%, so it's on par with a financial haven like Luxembourg and Panama, and a little bit more than half of New Zealand, Canada, US, UK. And while we don't have a one dominant export, which is the definition really of a banana republic, we do have one dominant export partner. 38% of everything we dig out of the ground or produce goes to China. Do you think we're on the right path?
Well, the answer is, the answer is yes, and yes, but qualified. The fact that China is our largest trading partner is hardly surprising. China is many countries' largest trading partners. In fact, you find most countries in our region, China is their largest trading partner.
Not to the extent of Australia. I mean, it's more like you go to Africa and you see the extent of dominance that we see in Australia.
Well, we have a big comparative advantage in a couple of commodities, but we also have our third biggest export is education, and that is one which is where we don't have a comparative advantage in it's not a commodity export. I mean, we have a comparative advantage, but it is one that we have earned, right? It's not one that is the stroke of good fortune or natural endowment. I'd say in terms of manufacturing, I think you'll find manufacturing has been increasing in recent years. Clearly, there are a lot of industries that have closed because they were simply uncompetitive. I mean, the auto sector is a classic
textiles.
case. And textiles. I mean, anything that requires scale and that needs both scale and is very labour cost dependent, very labour intensive, we're going to be at a disadvantage with. But you'll find there are examples of great Australian manufacturing, but it is more in the advanced manufacturing area. And I mean, this is a critically important thing to develop. It's why the Defence Industry Plan is so important. We should be making sure that those advanced manufacturing skills are developed in Australia, and that will then spill over into other parts of the economy.
In 2005, you said, coding is not just learning a new skill, it's learning how to think critically and solve problems, and these are the most important skills to have in the 21st century. Domestic enrolments in information technology are down 15% from 2001 to 2018, despite one of the most transformational booms in history through software and internet. Electrical engineering is down 53%, female enrolments in electrical engineering is down 63%. Universities were up until this year booming, but educating international students at the expense of domestic students. There are about twice as many international students studying IT than domestic students. To your credit, the $10 million that you put into the Australian Computing Academy in 2016 resulted in 134,000 primary and high school students taking part in computer science challenges, and subsequently we've seen a lift in domestic enrolments in IT in the last couple of years. But we're still down 15% on 2001 numbers. Why do you think we've been neglecting educating our own citizens in the skills of the future?
Well, I think the real question is, why are young people not enrolling in those courses? I find it it's a very hard question to answer, because it seems to fly in the face of what's actually happening in the market. I think that in a way, we need to promote the value of digital literacy as an academic endowment in and of itself. In other words, I think being digitally literate is an advantage, regardless of whether you go into coding or software or some form of technology business yourself. It's like numeracy. I mean, I'm a lawyer, right? So originally, sorry about that. I'm a recovering lawyer, but everyone hates lawyers, of course. But I always encourage kids not to do law unless they want to practice law. If you actually want to be a lawyer, then you've got to do law. But a lot of people do law because they think it's a good sort of background degree. And I'd say, well, if you want to if you're not quite sure what you want to do and you want to acquire some skills that are of general applicability, look at anything that is quantitative. And that might be computer science, it might be some engineering subjects, it might be maths, it might be financial subjects. So I think I think we need to make that case stronger. The big problem, however, the big conundrum is the relatively low percentage of women doing computer sciences and engineering. I mean, I remember talking to Sheryl Sandberg about it not so long ago, and she was saying that in Silicon Valley, the percentage of women doing these courses is lower than it was, a generation ago. Now, how crazy is that? Julie Inman Grant has her own theory, which I'll leave her. I won't spoil her punchline, so she'll invite her next year and she can give you her theory. But I think that is a big issue. Now, we put some money behind that to promote, women in STEM, but that is a big issue. And again, I struggle to understand why it is so, because you see in so many other professions and disciplines, you see very high percentages of women. I mean, when I went to university in the 70s, veterinary science was all full of guys, in moleskins and elastic-sided boots, right? Now, the student body is majority female. And, similar changes in law and medicine and so many other professions, but the engineering and computer science and related disciplines is not the case, and I think that's a big challenge.
How do you rate Scott Morrison's performance in innovation?
Well, Scott, I mean, look, it's not his comfort zone, to be sure. I mean, in the sense he doesn't have the background or enthusiasm for it that I did or do. But Scott was the treasurer when we agreed on the National Innovation and Science Agenda. So, that wasn't a kind of just something that popped out of my head one morning. That was a process that we worked on together and came out through a full cabinet process. So I think, but I do think you need persistent advocacy, but it helps if you actually have a background in it and have an understanding. I mean, I think for a lot of people, they find technical areas baffling and don't, they can't get their head around it. Something like the significance of virtualization in the telecom sector, particularly, is so profound, and yet it is remarkable how very, very few people in government, either here or internationally, understand its significance. And that's just one example that's relevant to the 5G debate, of course.
Well, just on the topic on backgrounds. So, as Prime Minister, one of the things I didn't envy in your position, and one of the tough things that you have to do is form cabinet and appoint ministers and various portfolios. Unlike in a company where I can come along and appoint a vice president of engineering or a chief financial officer, I can hire anyone. In Australia, under Section 64C of the Constitution, it requires a minister to be an elected member of Parliament. So instead, you have to figure out who you're going to put in various positions from a pool of people that are generally lawyers, consultants, or career politicians. And in fact, I went through the current cabinet and I went through their professions, and we have a political advisor, a lawyer, a public servant, a newspaper editor, a banker, a management consultant, a farmer, a public servant, a lawyer, a career politician and lawyer, a teacher, a career politician and lawyer, a teacher, a career politician, a political advisor, a lawyer, a proprietor of a building consultancy, a police officer, a management consultant and lawyer, a political advisor, a lawyer, a mechanical engineer, yay, Karen Andrews, an economist, Matt Canavan, a management consultant, aircraft pilot and taxation officer, a journalist, a lawyer, a rose grower, and I'm also a recruiter. It must be really tough to figure out who's in charge of, say, trade or innovation, science and technology. In this case, it's the only engineer, Karen Andrews. Do you think the Prime Minister should be able to select their executive from anywhere like they do in the United States, Germany, and Indonesia, so we can get the very best people?
Well, I don't. A lot of people have made that case, and I'll make a little footnote to what you said, Matt. This sort of principle of the Westminster system, I think, works best when the parliament is larger. So if you think it's an issue in the federal parliament where there are 227 members of the parliament, 151 MHRs and 76 senators, imagine what it's like in state parliament, where you might only have a few dozen people to choose from, if that. So it's that is an issue in Westminster, of course. Where this was all cooked up. The House of Commons has 650 members, and they've got even larger number in the House of Lords, and of course can always appoint someone to the House of Lords. So the British Prime Minister has got more options. I'd say though that often the qualities that a minister needs are not necessarily technical ones. It's important to have somebody that is enthusiastic, that is open-minded, and that focuses on the right policies. I mean, look, this is simplistic, but it's not too far from the mark. There are people in politics, and they tend to be people like myself who come into politics later in life, after a career, and so they're not lifetime politicians, who will look at policy issues and say, right, what is the best policy? What do we need to do to, get, the economy to grow or promote innovation or, do a better job on water conservation or whatever the issue of the moment is. And then, having identified that, then work out how to politically sell it. The other approach is the highly political one, and you get lifetime politicians tend to be like that, and they often tend to be politically successful. And they will say, what is the most politically saleable thing I can come up with that will get people to vote for me? And they go for that. Now, that you've got to get a mixture of both. But if you only do the political approach and you literally go from, day to day, week to week, trying to, win the political headlines, then you may end up being politically successful in the sense of winning elections, but what have you actually done? And you've got to be able to sit back and say, are our policies successful? Are they successful in a substantive, real sense, opposed to being, popular, momentarily? Because no policy is going to be popular if you end up with slowing economic growth and people not being able to get a good job or have a successful business.
I mean, you wanted Australia to be a republic, and so as a republic, that's having an executive that could be chosen would probably be one of the.
Well, that's. I don't want to pull you up on that, but I mean, a republic in the Australian context simply means having an Australian citizen as head of state rather than the Queen. Whether you have a directly elected executive president who chooses his or her own cabinet, like they do in the United States, is not really yes, that's a republic. But a republic doesn't have to be like that. There are plenty of republics that have parliamentary systems. Germany is a good example. There's plenty of others. I think it's important to remember that the US Constitution was designed in the 18th century and modelled on Britain, but at a time when the person who ran Britain was the king. So the president is modelled on a monarch, not on a prime minister. And has enormous power with, all of the consequences and controversies that we're seeing at the moment.
Okay. John Howard also reflected on this a little bit this morning. In today's newspapers, he said there are existential challenges facing both the Liberal and Labor parties, becoming composed predominantly of people who are not sufficiently representative of the people in the community that want to vote for us. Yep. Given the composition of cabinet, would you agree with both the parties?
I think oddly enough, the Liberal Party and the National Party have got a more diverse party room than the Labor Party. When I was a kid, I was a political correspondent in the state parliament in New South Wales in the mid-70s. And in those days, the Labor Party's members were mostly trade unionists, but they were trade unionists who'd become, union officials who had started off on the shop floor. So there were boilermakers and bricklayers and, train drivers and people who'd actually worked. If you look at the Labor Party today, it is essentially an apparatchik class. Many of them have come through the union movement, but they've went to university, got a job in the union, got into Parliament, or went to university, got a job with a politician, went into Parliament. Now, there's plenty of those in the Liberal Party too, by the way, but we are nonetheless still more diverse. But yes, I agree it is a problem. When I joined the Liberal Party in 1973, it was a much more diverse party membership than it is today. And this is the point Howard was making about his own experience. So as political parties get, more estranged from the electorate or the people they actually are seeking the support of, then you end up with policies and attitudes that are out of step and, may ultimately prove to be politically unsuccessful. And there have been plenty of examples of that in recent times.
Okay. And while you're here, I've got to ask you a question on the NBN.
Yes.
Despite spending $50 billion in Australia's largest infrastructure project ever, today we're ranked 62nd for global broadband speed, 40% slower than the global average. Now,
those statistics are absolute BS, Matt. Absolute BS. I mean, there is no country, comparable developed country, which has as ubiquitous availability of high-speed broadband as Australia.
Let me continue the question.
What about the United States? There are places in the United States, where there's, gigabit speed broadband, but there are plenty of places in the United States where you're flat out getting dial-up. I just want to say this in defence of the NBN. I mean, let me just give you the quick cassette on the NBN. Ubiquitous broadband is a really good idea. The way Labor went about it was certifiably insane. The New Zealanders did a much better job. But what I had to do, I inherited a mess and I had to make the best of it. And you know what? The project is nearly complete and it will keep on getting upgraded forever. And anyone that thinks there's a set and forget in telecom networking technology is as wrong as thinking there's a set and forget in government policy.
I agree with that. So let me continue. So the problem with the NBN being slow, I was speaking to Steve Baxter the other day, who's one of Australia's biggest entrepreneurs in network infrastructure. He said, it's not a problem of mixed fibre and copper. 6 million of the 10 million households today could get 500 meg to 1 gig to their house with just a line card and a modem upgrade. Yeah. He says the issue with the NBN is an accounting problem, and it's an accounting problem that you inherited. So originally costed at 43 billion. The industry knew it would cost between 70 billion and 90 billion. You did a good job of getting it back down to 50 billion. But this huge cost of $30 billion of equity and $20 billion of the debt, right, in the way it was originally architected, is legislated to have a financial return. In this case, the debt component has an interest rate of 3.96%, which is $700 million a year in interest payments. So the problem is the actual cost to run the network, the fixed costs are about $3 billion a year, but there's also this interest component on top. And the cost to run the network is so expensive that when retail service providers go to buy access, they don't buy enough. Then they under-provision, they get congestion. Essentially, it costs 70 cents per megabit per month to get data from LA to Sydney, but to get it from the NBN exchange to your home, it's between $11 and $14. So in a way, because it's mandated to generate a financial return for the government, it's too expensive. The question for you is, given that the NBN is forecast by its own plan to generate 10.4 billion in additional GDP by 2021, do you think it's reasonable that a monopoly network that has fixed cost to operate, funded by taxpayers with cheap financing, should be forced to generate a financial return for the government? In other words, we could take that 20 billion of debt, for example, and rather than charge 3.96%, which I can probably get a home loan for now, instead...
This is what the government is charging the NBN for that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you could refinance, I mean, the last Treasury auction was at 92 basis points. Okay. So you could refinance that maybe at, I mean, I was speaking to Stephanie Glass at Southern and Cromwell, who does the paperwork for a lot of these issuances, and she says you could probably finance this at 50 basis points over the current cash rate. So that would bring down the cost of running the network by about $500 million a year. I mean, should we try and find ways to make the network more efficient, and should we, is it reasonable?
Well, what you're really saying is, well, the government's the IRR that the government is estimated to get is only about 3%.
3.2, yeah.
Yeah, so which
That's on the equity component.
Yeah, but that's on the government's investment. Yeah, that's right. Now that presumes that the debt will be able to be repaid if the debt's sound, money good, but which I'm sure it is. But look, I mean, this is a vexed issue. Are the wholesale costs of the NBN too expensive? The people that complain about that, about the retailers. I mean, look, the thing that I learnt about broadband, and I made a really detailed study of it globally, the economics of it, is that one thing that people will not pay, they will not pay a premium for line speed, really data rates is what we should talk, because speed is the wrong term, as you know. I mean, anyway, we understand that. But they won't pay a premium for data rates above that level, which gives them the functionality they want. I learnt that actually quite a long time ago studying the history in Korea, where Korea Telecom at that time, this is going back, in the early 2010s, had two products. They had a 100 meg product and a 50 meg product, and the difference was 3,000 won a month, which is not very much at all. People were churning from 100 back to 50 because they'd worked out they can do whatever they wanted to do with 50 rather than 100. So the problem with the problem is that people will not pay much, if anything, of a premium for high speeds, and this is most people. I mean, there are obviously people that have got particular use cases. So the economics of it is challenging. The assumptions underneath broadband have changed. If you go back when Rudd announced the NBN back in 2008, nobody was really assumed. People were talking about how long it took you to download a file, download a movie. Nobody, I mean, people do, I guess, but what we've now got is a world of concurrent streaming. So instead of people needing intermittently a very high data rate, you've got, particularly at times of the evening, you've got everybody needing the same, a substantial data rate. It might be, with a number of devices, it might be 25, 30, 40 megs, it might be 10 megs, but the bottom line is that has put so much more demand on the network. Look, the NBN has cut their prices. They have responded to that. I mean, they're best able to defend their pricing. But, we beat up the NBN, and I've got to say about the NBN, they've done a terrific job from an engineering point of view and building the network. They have been hopeless at PR. If I've said this to Bill Morrow many times, I said, Bill, if you were 1/10 as good at PR as you are at everything else, you'd have a much better image. And the fact of the matter is that you've now got to a situation where there are well over, my last check, 10 million premises that can get access to the NBN. Now, that is a hell of an achievement. I mean, they are literally activating 30, 40,000 premises, new customers, signed up customers a week. So it's an enormous achievement. And I think given the state of the challenge, given how well they have done compared to many other countries, I think they've got a lot to be proud of. So I am really proud of the achievement of the NBN in very, very difficult circumstances. But I got to say, there are going to be big challenges with the satellite, because you've got obviously limited capacity there. I think we need to get to a point with the satellite of something I've argued for a long time, but hasn't been able to be achieved technically or with IP rights. Going to have to get to the point of having, distributed localized caching.
Yep.
I think, with the satellite, and you're going to have similar answers, I think, with fixed wireless, because there you've got, you actually have a finite amount of bandwidth, and the demand, because of the streaming phenomenon, is just, is increasing at a rate that had not been anticipated, other than by some very wise people, until recently.
Just if we could take the speed limiters off from having it be forced to generate a financial return, half the country would be at 500 to a gig today with the network as is, and half would be about 70 meg.
But Matt, they may well be able to have the capacity to be at 500 to a gig, technically, but I don't believe they would pay for it. That's the point, you know. And so look, I remember having a discussion in Tokyo. Was it Tokyo? So anyway, it was with one of the big Japanese telcos, and they had a 2 gig domestic residential broadband product. And I was talking to them, and I said, 2 gig, that's amazing. Why 2 gig? And he looked at me as though I was a complete idiot. And he said, 2 gig, twice as good as 1 gig. And the reality is, for, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Watanabe, there is nothing they can do with 2 gigs that they can't do with 1 gig, and in all probability, nothing they can do with the gig that they can't do with 100 megs. And you know what? They're not paying a premium for it. Okay. And one of the great fallacies in broadband economics is the assumption that the amenity, that's to say the use or the utility to the customer of broadband increases with the data rate in a linear fashion. It absolutely doesn't. But that is the sort of assumption, and a lot of people in the tech sector just kind of blithely assume that because I don't know why, but it simply isn't right. And this difficulty of getting people to pay, getting people to pay for higher speeds is a fundamental one. But look, again, as far as the NBN is concerned and broadband generally is concerned, as technology evolves, as demand evolves, you've got to keep on upgrading it. What we wanted to do with NBN was get to ubiquitous connectivity for high-speed broadband as quickly as possible, and we knew that with the old plan of, fibre to the premises everywhere, that simply wasn't going to be able to be done in a reasonable time frame or at a reasonable cost. I mean, if this project had cost $80 billion, I mean, remember, don't forget this, Kevin Rudd, God bless his cotton socks, Kevin said the NBN is going to be such a great financial deal, mums and dads will be lining up to invest in it. I don't think so.
Okay. 2 quick questions, because I know we're running out of time.
Yeah.
The first is a bit of a fun question.
Yes.
I always expected as Prime Minister, the day you get sworn in,
yeah,
they take you in a room, they sit you down, and they tell you, this is what really happened in the world over the last 100 years. Does that happen?
No, not really. Well, there's always a incoming, security briefing on some, whatever the hot national security issues are. But yes, it's not. It's not quite as dramatic as that. You know. Okay. It's not like sort of. Being ushered into a room, being told, by the way, we're broke. Not the case.
Okay. And the final question is, how do we get innovation back on the national agenda?
Well, I think you can't rely on politicians to do everything, right? And I mean, if I was at different times an effective advocate for innovation, that was because I had a fairly unique background for someone in politics. I went into politics when I was 50. I went into politics the same age Scott Morrison is now. So I was a grown-up. I started many businesses. Some of them had been very successful. You mentioned one. Others were buried late at night, moonless nights in the forest. Because they were so humiliatingly unsuccessful. So I had a very different background, but I think you need to get organisations like this, conferences like this, get out and make the case more strongly. I mean, one of the good things that we did with the NISA was we got innovation on the agenda, and you started to see Australian institutional investors investing in it. I mean, look, you and I have been around for a while. Back in the 90s, there was literally no money for tech at all. Now, I'll just conclude with this little bizarre anecdote. So in the mid-90s, I had a couple of deals going on. One was Aussiemail, where I was helping Sean Howard. You know, Sean was the founder of Aussiemail, and I was one of his investors and like his in-house deal person. So we couldn't raise money for Aussiemail. It was the biggest ISP in the country. It had thousands of customers. It had real revenues. It was on a track to profitability. It was a real business on any test. On the other hand, I had no difficulty raising money for a gold project in the middle of Siberia, 3.5 hours north by plane from Irkutsk, which you probably haven't ever heard of. So to say it was in the middle of nowhere was an understatement. So Australians were prepared to take risks on natural resources in the scariest and hairiest of places, but they weren't prepared to do it in tech. Now, the good thing is that's changed. So, you know, in the 20 years or so, 25 years or so, there's been a big shift, and particularly in recent times, and institutional money is going into technology and innovation generally, and of course, all of the, you know, the unicorns, whether it's Atlassian or Canva or so many others, have all demonstrated that there's success. I mean, there weren't a lot of successes out of the 1990s tech boom in Australia. I mean, Aussiemail was one. Yeah, and then it struggled, right? So people became very skeptical, but I think now you've got proven success and the institutional money is there. But I agree, we need to talk about innovation more, and you need to get it on the agenda. And believe me, if there are parts of the tax or regulatory framework that are not working, and I've been reading some of the industry literature on this recently, and clearly there are concerns, then you've got to make that case to government, make it in the media, make it publicly, because what government has to do is recognise, and I think I probably recognise this more than my predecessors or successors have done because of my business background. What government's got to do is recognise that everything has to be reviewed all the time. I mean, that frightens people. It terrifies people in Canberra. But you just cannot assume that the tax regime you had that was working 5 years ago is still going to work today. The world has changed. So you guys are at the coalface, to use an outdated term that might find favour with the National Party, perhaps. But you're really at the pointy end of it all, and you should be making that case to government. But above all, get it out there in the media so that people are aware of it. And I'm obviously always very happy to help. I believe our future, our children and grandchildren's future, depends on you and this sector, the innovation sector, thriving and going to even greater heights in Australia. I mean, literally nothing less than the future of this country depends on you. If we fall behind in innovation, we will fall behind in every other respect, and that's, in a very competitive world, that's a very grim prospect.
Malcolm, great talking with you.
Great to talk to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Honourable Malcolm Turnbull.